This week, I braved the brutal wilderness for fame and fortune.
And I write down the best recipes for squirrel brain. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Garrett, and we watch anime.
Garrett, this week we're exploring an unfamiliar territory, a show that is exciting to talk about because this is the manga I am currently reading. This show does many things, but it managed to do something that hasn't happened for a long while to my cynical Weeb heart, and that has thoroughly impressed me. This is a show that provides action, intrigue, cooking recipes, and a large amount of violence, so that someone watching will never ever be bored. We will be discussing the historical, survival action treasure hunt anime Golden Kamuy. But before we begin, Garrett, what are new fans going to be expecting from this show?
If anyone out there has ever seen The Revenant, directed by Inarritu, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and a very angry bear, that's a good start. Mm-hmm. And by far, my favorite quote to date is probably, "My hunter's soul is getting erect."
This show mentions erections a lot. It's also like pretty laissez-faire about violence, which I think is really funny. And it's kind of a cooking show. But I love it. I don't want to temper anybody's experience, but this is probably one of the favorite ones I've done throughout the course of this podcast. But so once again, we're doing the show Golden Kamuy. The manga came out in 2008. And for some reason, the anime didn't fully come out until 2018. I don't know why it took so long to make an anime, but I'm glad it did.
They needed all that time to make something so wonderful.
I think knowing the visual aspect of this show, I'm glad it came out when anime was as good as it is. This show does like a lot of things at once, and more than anything is really educational. It takes stuff that would be not of interest to weebs and make it super interesting. So, right. As I was saying before, this is kind of the show that that really much explains whether or not you're a Japanophile or you're a weeb. Essentially what it means is, like, if you love Japan, you want to know about the history of the Russo-Japanese War, if you want to know about the Ainu and all the little intricate parts of the culture, then this is for you. But if you're a weeb and you just like the surface level stuff, like you rather just watch High School of the Dead on loop, then this might not be for you. But
right. I kind of liken it to, and again, coming at this from the Noob perspective, but it seems like you are an appreciator of all things anime. But for people who have more narrow likes, if someone really digs like Samurai Champloo, where you're talking about specific historical periods, the culture around them, even though Samurai Champloo does inject bits of modernity with like beatboxing and stuff like that, or you have Naruto, and you get like a taste of something. It's like what they are, but
you get like ninja.
What's your jam? And if Samurai Champloo is your jam, then this show is for you.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I would say that this show does a really good job of paying attention to history and not trying to make it over again. Like, it very much, like, I would say if you were to have like an American movie version of it, you mentioned The Revenant, I think this also is like really close to the movie Dances with Wolves.
Right, except infinitely more watchable.
That's true. It's a lot more watchable and a lot more violent. So,
but to your point there with Dances with Wolves, one of the things that's really cool about this, because you said Dances with Wolves and you said educational, they take really special care in this show to be sensitive to like the cultures of, essentially in America would be Native Americans, right? Because I think you said it real quick earlier there, but the Ainu people, which the closest that I could sort of come that someone from the United States might understand is an Inuit or an Eskimo, or again, like Native Americans, someone who really cares about the land and the spirits and the respect for the world that you live in. And this show really, it treats it, I think, wonderfully.
Yeah, it doesn't really give you like the normal stereotypes of what an indigenous person would go through, and it actually puts them front and center to the story, which is why I love it. So Garrett, give us a little bit backstory of what the show is up to and like maybe what you thought about it, whether you liked it or not?
Right. No, so I absolutely loved it. Not to give away my my score at the end. Everyone's
worried
gonna
about
have
this
to
one.
listen to all 60 minutes in order to find it out, or you can fast forward. But don't do that. It's more fun if you listen.
Right.
So we start off with this character Shugimoto, and or as you will come to learn him as, the immortal Shugimoto.
Yeah, and so much so that he says it a lot, like all the time. Like this guy,
he's like, I'm getting into the bath, immortal Shugimoto.
It might be too hot, and he just wants the temperature. I will not die in this bath. It's like, I liken it to the meme. I don't know if you know this meme. It's called Leroy Jenkins. It's like the Warcraft thing where it's like, Leroy Jenkins! But this is more like, Sugimoto the Immortal! It very much sticks with that. And like if you were wondering what his nickname was.
Yeah. So immortal Shugimoto. He is a soldier who has returned from the Russo-Japanese War. And I guess there was a bit of a gap in my knowledge of Russo-Japanese relations where I didn't understand the war between them. But I don't know if you could expound upon that.
Right. So we're going to do a little treat for those listening. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this video so that I'm going to explain to you the Russo-Japanese War in boring detail. But there's a guy named Bill Wartz that has this really great channel on YouTube that did this thing called The History of Japan, which I always love referring to when I want to make fun videos on this stuff. And he does a better job of explaining it in like 20 seconds than I ever could in like 3 minutes. So I'm going to pause it now, and we're going to get back to it.
They made a new government, which was a lot more Western. They made a new constitution that was pretty Western, and a military that was pretty Western. And do you know what else is Western? That's right, it's conquering stuff. So what can we conquer? Korea. They conquer Korea, taking it from its previous owner, China, and then go a little bit further. And Russia rushes in out of nowhere and says, "Stop, no, you can't take that. We were going to build a railroad through here to try to get some warm water." And Russia builds their railroad, supervised by a shit ton of soldiers. And then when the railroad was done, they downgrade it to a fuck ton. Did I say downgrade? I meant upgrade. And Japan says, "Can you maybe chill?" And Russia says, "How about maybe you chill?" Japan is kind of scared of Russia. You'll never guess who's also kind of scared of Russia. Great Britain. So Japan and Great Britain make an alliance together so they can be a little less scared of Russia. Feeling confident, Japan goes to war against Russia, just for a moment, and then they both get tired and stop.
I have never felt so informed on a topic before.
I know, and it's frenetic and everything. So, like, if you had plenty of sugar to eat, it'll probably burn a few calories just watching that. So
Right. So back to the first episode. Okay.
Right.
There's a lot of backstory in there, really juicy, meaty stuff to sink your teeth into, which brings me to, there is one thing in the show, as much as you love it, I guarantee you don't love this one thing. It's something that you talked to me.
I think you and I are probably going to be on the same page on this one but I want to make sure you get to the
right. So we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Because it's in like the first few episodes, you know.
Okay. Then I think we're on the right page. Yeah, go for it.
All right, very good. So Shugimoto is panning for gold, and he's trying to collect money because his friend has passed, and his friend's dying words to him are, "Will you take care of my family? Will you take care, in particular, of my wife, who has this eye condition where she's like slowly losing her vision?" And he says, if you could only save 200 yen to bring her to the doctors in America, then, you know, that's where the best doctors in the world are, even in 1905. Now, it's 1904. They're probably just going to cut her eyeballs out. So I don't really know what advanced medicine they think they're going to find. But the crux of this is Shugimoto needs money. And as he's sitting there panning for gold in the river, there is a sake drunk fool talking to him, and he tells them this tale. He weaves this story of a man who found an unimaginable amount of gold, and he was going to use that to fight the Japanese government. And the Japanese government put him in this far-off prison, the prison that no one returns from. Like, and while there, he started creating a map to the gold because he couldn't write a letter. He wanted to tell his compatriots, his compadres, this is where you find it. But if you wrote a letter, the guards are going to snap it, and they're going to then kill you and then find the gold themselves. So he found a way around it, and he started tattooing his fellow prisoners and putting maps on their bodies. And he said, if you all break out and you work together to use the map, you'll find the location and everyone can split in it. And Sugimoto hears this story and he's like, that's insane.
No.
But when he wakes up from a nap, that drunkard has a gun pointed at him and he says, I've told you too much. And he manages to fight him off. But what he would have simply cast aside as a ridiculous story, he's like, holy crap, if this guy was willing to kill me over it, I think I might believe it.
And he follows him, and he finds that not only is it true, but the guy that was trying to shoot him had a map on him.
Right.
And so he starts on this like journey. He's like, well, this is money. This is what I need. This is the gold I'm to search for. I'm a strong soldier. You know, I deserve this. Another thing that's kind of a running theme is that like the Japanese government didn't really take good care of their soldiers at the time, like made them run into suicide missions and all that stuff. It wasn't really well. They didn't really take care of their soldiers. Sugimoto's kind of like a continuation of that idea. So along the way, after chasing this guy with a map, and this is where we'll probably bump into my only real quibble of the show, is they find the guy's buried in snow. And apparently bears, when they eat someone and they're not full, it's like winter season, they're hibernating, they can't eat a lot, they'll bury their food in snow. So this guy's just like,
they put it in the freezer so they could return to it at a later date.
I know, it's like their version of a Tupperware container. And yeah, go ahead, Garrett.
No, and so ladies and gentlemen out there, I'm going to guess Kyle's one issue with this otherwise terrific show is my boy Kyle loathes CGI animation.
Yeah.
And the bears suck.
They look terrible.
They do not match the rest of the show. The entire rest of the show is your standard issue, awesome animation.
It looks good.
I'm sure a lot of it's computer generated, but the actual bears, you're like, what the hell?
It looks like, as I said, what Japan makes it look like when they do CGI is it looks like you're using puppets. You might as well just use. They look jerky. The frame rate on them are terrible. Like it looks like the movie.
It looks more like the Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Exactly, it looks terrible. And Beastars kind of did this too, and I had trouble with that. But I think this is the time where it was so apparent. I know you probably saw it, were like, wow, that's bad. I see what Kyle means by CGI.
Yes.
And it does really blow what would normally be like almost a really perfect anime to me. But honestly, as I said, it's a very small quibble because the bears are a part of this show, but not like such a huge thing that it distracts me all the time.
Which kind of brings me to the point of like, did you see The Revenant?
Yes, I did.
All right, so there's like a whole bear rape scene where the bear almost takes out Leonardo DiCaprio and he fights back. And so that's what sort of made me think about this is you're out in the wilderness. There's a spiritual element to it. There's a man on a quest and bears are out to kill you constantly. Bears. Pop quiz. Which bears are best?
Well, according to this one, the brown one, because that one was just like not having it.
False. Black bear. Well, I don't know. There's multiple schools of thought.
And so Sugimoto's now has to face his bear because now he's touched his food, but he wants the skin that has the mark so he can have the map, and just so he wants to carry the corpse around. And he meets probably one of my favorite characters now that exists in anime now, Asirpa, the Ainu girl, who is very knowledgeable about the wilderness, and she and Sugimoto get into kind of a pact to help do this thing. Now, the one thing that she speaks about is that I think it just makes the thing even more extra juicy and intriguing is she's like, oh, how cruel. And he's like, what do you mean? He goes, well, the tattoo isn't something that you can really read on the skin. It actually is marked on the meridian lines where we skin people. And so you actually have to remove the skin off of someone to get a full map of this thing. And I was like, ooh, intriguing. So it's like, yeah.
But that being said, so he realizes that as good as a soldier he is, as immortal as he is, he needs her native knowledge of the woods to really kind of get around. So they forge that partnership. But she's not down with killing and skinning all these dudes.
No.
So essentially they agree to capture these guys and they kind of like put them on a rack and she's going to sketch everything so that they don't need to skin everybody.
Right, exactly. It's an interesting idea. I think it's just, as I said, it's unique, something I've never seen before. But the show is ideally two things. It is a show, a race to a treasure style show. Like, I don't know if you heard about the movie It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, where everybody's just kind of racing towards the same treasure at the same time. Basically, it's a movie from, I don't know what time period it was. Well, I'll probably put it in the text below. But he basically, a prisoner says, I have a treasure, and X marks the spot, go get it. And the whole country, the whole town, city that this guy was imprisoned in went nuts trying to find this map. And apparently it was a ruse to get him out of jail. So it was like it was an interesting movie, a very fun, like the town goes nuts over a treasure map. And it's this thing, like all these different factions are running to find this treasure. And it's really cool. And the second thing, which I think you will probably have more of an idea for, is that it kind of reminds me of The Last of Us. And in that it's that kind of quasi father-daughter relationship between Sugimoto and Asirpa, and them kind of working with each other. Right. And Asirpa is very knowledgeable, but she's still a little girl. Sugimoto is, you know.
But how little is she? Because again, they tease it. So
I think
the relationship between these two is very much Joel and Ellie.
Right.
Joel and exactly. It's very much father-daughtery.
Right.
However, everyone else, including her Aniu family, is like, you guys should get it on.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. And back in the day, probably like the indigenous peoples of the time, you know, were able to
married off at 13, 14.
13, 14. Yeah, I think by the time she is, I want to say she's like only 12 or 13. She's very young for this show. And I don't think the show, while they joke about this idea of like him marrying her, I think the general idea is it's more of like a father-daughter relationship.
Well, there is this one really epic moment, and I'm not going to put the cart before the horse, but there's this truly, I laugh so hard, where he's brought to the Aniu village, and he meets her family and everything, and he can't understand their native language.
Right.
But the grandmother is like, while Aspira is like sleeping, she says, I want you to take care of her. I want you to love her forever. Never leave her. Yeah. And he just kind of looks at her and goes, I understand. and then the next cutscene is, farewell, and he leaves in the middle of the night. And I'm just like,
this show, and you know what I liken it to? Another thing that I like it to, another video game that I like it to, is The Legend of Zelda.
Okay.
Because when the treasure hunt is happening, when there's conflict, it's intense. It is dark. It is violent. It is serious. But when it's just Sugimoto and Asirpa together, it's fun, light, and comical. And I love the kind of juxtaposition between those two things, because it's like Legend of Zelda, because Legend of Zelda is going like, you have to save the world. I'm going to destroy Ganon, but first you have to like Link goes off and like grabs chickens, you know, like he does these random tasks off the middle of nowhere. Like, aren't you trying to find skins, or are you just learning about how to cook squirrel brains or something like that? Or let's learn about how to fish and stuff like that. It like the pace of the show is so well rounded out that you constantly swing between these like intrigue to like light and fun and comical stuff. So
and I did think it balanced that really well, but and you mentioned this kind of in the beginning. So you've got this sort of pair of people on a journey, treasure hunt. It's a survival tale.
Right.
It's action, and at the same time, they take their care to have the most absurd cooking scenes to discuss.
Like the level of detail is Food Wars, right? In my mind.
And he carries around, I don't know if this was common at the time, he carries around this little satchel of miso, and he wants to put it on every dish, and he's like, oh, if you're Japanese, it always tastes better with miso.
Yeah.
And she thinks it's osoma, which is poop, and she's like, stop putting poop on everything.
And then she's like, and then she'll bring it up, like when the grandma says, well, I want you to marry her, he goes, what did she say? She goes, you really got to stop putting poop in your food. And so like that. And I thought that was like, it's very endearing. Like the relationship's really endearing. I love that Asirpa is like a strong woman in this show, even though she's a young girl, but then she still shows her girl side and like that she's still very young. It's a very, as I said, very endearing. So one of the things that I think that we have to make sure we give enough time, because you said you weren't sure about this information, whether or not it was true or not, is depictions of the Ainu. Now, the Ainu is actually a real indigenous culture. And you would think when you see Japan that, like, you would think, like, Hokkaido and all that stuff, they all are kind of culturally homogenous. But the people of Hokkaido, the Ainu, are actually a real genetically distinct culture with its own language and everything like that. You said it best. Like, it was like the Inuit. It was very close to that, like, Inuit style people, and their kind of genetic genotype is this weird mix between the Aleutian Native Americans from the United States, the indigenous Russians, and the Japanese, all meeting in this like one area. And so they kind of look a little bit European, but kind of Native American, but also a little bit Asian. And they all kind of
hot.
So they make this like this distinct culture. The one thing I appreciate, because one thing that we'll notice when anytime a Native American is brought up in any form of pop culture, they're always wearing headdress. They're always wearing war paint. They're always doing their calls, their war cries. You know, if you play Street Fighter, it's like the Japanese guy, he'll wear a gi. You know, the American, he'll have a tattoo and hair. The Native American, his name's Thunderhawk. He has he does everything Native American. Everything is this like weird character of it.
I watched an episode of Murder, She Wrote last night on IMDb TV, which, by the way, out there, I'm not plugging it. It is the worst streaming service I've ever tried to watch things on. But they have Murder, She Wrote. And there was a questionable episode about Native American things, and they kept calling them Injuns and Indians. And I was like, ooh, 1988. Ooh,
you
1988.
don't get it. You're not there yet.
But like Angela Lansbury or Jessica Fletcher, the lead character, is, of course, the most progressive. And she keeps saying, like, she still says Indian, but she's like saying the most appropriate, like, respectful things she can. It was just, you just watch it and you're like, well, this is a capsule in time and I can't get too mad about it. One thing I think you wanted to talk about this show, though, what do I love Westerns.
Right.
Do you remember what I always say, like, makes a Western?
I think you said it was like, you might have to take me for.
So it's the quiet moments, but it's the music.
Right.
Whoever did the soundtrack for this anime, good golly, Miss Molly.
Yeah, it's a good and I think one thing about, like, just like I had to bring back to like the Ainu idea, like, they weren't caricatures of Ainu. They spoke the language. They actually had someone who spoke Ainu on the staff to show them, like, this is what they did. This is the
did they? That's cool.
Like, they actually had an advisor to make sure that, like, whatever they talked about with this show actually had true thing to it. And much like indigenous people anywhere else, they're highly, subjugated in their country. Like, they weren't allowed to take land. They weren't allowed to use their language. That's why, like, the Ainu language is kind of dying. There's only really 13,000 Ainu in general in the country, and one of the characters as well is Matagi, so that's another indigenous crew in that area. But it's like the idea that, and they weren't even recognized until as an indigenous culture until 1997. So that just gives you an idea of, like, how long it took them to be included in Japanese history, so to speak.
Yeah, Japan messed up at times.
Yeah, they really weren't that nice.
Although that fair thing could be said, indigenous people around the world, regardless of, like, country, get the short end of the stick. Right,
like the Maori in New Zealand, the Hawaiians, from
an outsider's perspective, though, the Maori from New Zealand seem to get pushed to the forefront a little more than, like, others, whether it be like their sports teams doing the haka and stuff like that. They appear to, like, sort of lean into that culture, whereas, like, you were about to say the Hawaiians, or whether it be the Inuits, or whether it be the Aniu
or the Navajo, like, they're forced to
pick a Native American tribe.
Right.
If
they were kind of forced to go to education schools, they weren't allowed to speak their language. Like, so I really like that this show kind of decolonized history in that way, and I got to give it its props for that. But you spoke about music, and it's one of those things that I also wanted to talk to you about, because this show, this theme song, started as a very simple question and ended up putting me on the weirdest rabbit hole search I've ever seen in my entire life. So did you listen to the theme song? You usually do, so I'm just going to ask.
I did, and I will say, I'll just leave it at this, and I'll let you go on your way with the conversation. Yeah. I do not think the theme show is indicative of the high quality of the soundtrack behind the actual TV show, because it felt like if you took a popular 2000 rock song, but it was definitely like the Muzak version that gets played at JCPenney.
So here's what happened. I listened to the theme song because now we're doing that. Now we're kind of incorporating, and I'll play it right now, just so people have an idea. And it sounds like Alter Bridge. Now, if you remember, Alter Bridge was the
Christian
band that
rock,
became
right?
It was Creed minus Scott Stapp, and the lead singer was from another group. And they had that like very specific. So then I hear like someone saying like "desire" and like that kind of voice with like the R's are very REO Speedwagon, like very pronounced.
A little glass jaw-y.
Oh yeah, very much so. Like the R's are very much pronounced, and I go, huh? So they got an American to sing the theme song. How interesting! And then you go, and it was fluent English. So I'm like, this guy's American.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, fluent Japanese flies out of the screen and a different voice. And so I go, wait. So is the guy American? Is he a Japanese, the native who becomes this? The simple question was, is the lead singer of this band, for I will agree with you, is a very unimpressive song.
Mm-hmm.
Is he Japanese or English? So I looked up because usually when you listen, I know when I see what part, like I don't read Japanese very well, but I know when the music is being quoted. And it took me into the band Man with a Mission, not to be confused with Man on a Mission, which is Mo, Mabel, and Oscar, the wrestlers from 1990s fame. But they are a band, and I will tell you this, they have, I don't know, so the quick answer is I don't know what they are because they wear wolf heads. And when you read their biography, it states, in the year 19XDX, the Earth was engulfed in war. Nation pitted against nation, human against human. Every living thing on the planet was locked in a chaotic battle to acquire each other's wealth and power. In the meantime, in the farthest away land of Ladyland, there lived a genius biology named Dr. Jimmy, who was about to conclude a mad science experiment for a pack of superior creatures that would be called Man with a Mission. Are they human? Are they wolves? Their looks may be deceiving, even comical at first glance, but they have incredible brain power and superhuman physique. So Garrett,
this is like Japanese Gwar.
It's Gwar, or another one we have is who sings a key to get Gramercy Park? Deadsy. It's it's very much like Blue Pinkerstein, and so
that's freaking Cher and Greg Allman's kid, man.
Yeah. And so I'm like looking at it, and they're like all wearing wolf heads. They're in random shots. I'll give you the band. There's a band member named Spare Rib. And another character named Kamikaze Boy, and there's another guy whose name is DJ Santa Monica. I have no idea. So I started with a question and ended up with even more questions by the end of my search. So that's Man with a Mission, who sound honestly, and if I did look this up, I'd be like, this band's a boring Alter Bridge clone. I don't care. So I was just like, what is going on? So I think the next thing we want to bring up before we go further into the story is the depictions of violence in this show. And I think this is where the manga and the anime differ. But I just wanted to like think your thoughts about how like violent this show was. Like maybe give us a few thoughts.
So I didn't feel like it was particularly violent. Like, yeah, it's graphic. There's like shooting. I will tell you that there were a couple times I sat there, and when I started watching the first few episodes, my wife ran out to grab dinner, so I was sitting on the couch with like the two dogs, one's on like either side of me, and get your bleep ready. And like I would see something, and I'd go, "Oh!" and like, so I guess in a way I was reacting to a shocking moment of violence. I don't know if the actual violence I saw shocked me, or if it was just the surprise action in which it got me, whether it was the random neck breaking,
right,
or certain stabbing. At
like
one point,
going
to get
through
away.
Sugimoto's cheek.
Oh yeah, he put like skewers through his cheek. Or at one point to get away, he like poked like went like yuck, 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 and like poked someone in the eye.
And so I know, and so I know that if you just watch the anime, you're right, the violence is like a lot more tame. So I'll give you a great example. There is a scene in which 3 members from the 7th Division, we'll go over the factions in a bit, find Sugimoto, and they get him and they say, give us the skins or whatever. And Sugimoto sees behind them is a bear cave. And a Sirpa has given him a clue that says that if you really don't want to get attacked by a bear, you actually should dive into their cave because, they just don't attack there. They attack outside of their cave. And so he saw that they were going to shoot him, and he jumps into the bear cave. And so as they're trying to get him out, a CGI bear pops out, a puppet bear. And the first thing he does is swipe one of the bad guys in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the anime, he just looks like, blah, and he's like, oh, God, and like all that stuff. He's like bloody. In the manga, his face comes clean off and is just hanging like a loose skin mask off of his face. So you can actually see that stuff in the manga. Right. This leads me to a thing. This show makes it seem as that people are like made out of butter in this show. Like when skewers go, they go right through no problem. There's a scene where someone is like trying to stab with a bayonet and it goes into the hand and into the face. Like I'm just like, people are made out of like paper mache in this show.
So I want to talk in particular about one character who sort of reinforces how damaged the people in the show are.
Right.
But let's circle back. Let's talk about the factions. Okay, so we talk about how Sugimoto came out of the Russo-Japanese War.
Right.
He was a part of a group called the First Division.
Remember the first
and
one?
everyone in the show keeps remembering him from a battle called Port Arthur. Apparently, he was a real badass.
Well, that was a big deal. They like lost a lot of Japanese people, but they won it. It's like kind of like D-Day for them in that war. Like they got and the fact that the first were like kind of like the Suicide Squad. They were called the White Sashers, which means like they were going to go at night in the White Sashers so they could see each other. But like it really was considered a suicide mission, and Sugimoto was part of it. So
So that's the First Division. As far as we've seen through the first 6 episodes, which is what I got up to, I know Kyle went to 8. Sugimoto is the only one from the First Division. Now, as he's trying to track down these skins or these maps, he comes across soldiers from the 7th Division.
Mm-hmm.
Think of the 7th Division, for those out there, as SEAL Team 6.
Right.
This is like the elite of the elite of the elite.
They're Spanish-American War. Like, so they're not like modern. They still have the same weapons and everything, but they're just way more trained. Yeah.
Right. They are the best of the best.
Right.
For what 1904 Japan.
Right. Yeah.
And they've come back from the war, and like a lot of wars, but particularly older wars, there wasn't really a place for soldiers when they came home. And so they become mercenaries. Now, I got a little confused at one point. Is there a third group involved?
Yeah, so you nailed one, which is, so the first one is Sugimoto, Asirba's group. They end up getting Shirichi in there, the Escape King. But then who
slithers and goops places.
That's favorite. He like tries to save him. He like comes out like because he's covered in bear cut. He's like, "Hi there, I'm here to help you." So funny. And so Saiichi is his name. But there is another group, as you said, the 7th Division, which is led by a guy who's named Tsurumi, and we'll talk about him. He's a freaking whack job, and I know that's the guy you probably want to talk about. But then there's another group called the Shinsengumi, and the Shinsengumi were the original special police for the old shogunate. So think like late 1800s when so you know that we were talking about this like 1850s, 1860s. The United States opened the Japanese border up, but they still had a shogunate. They still had like an army that was kind of running the country, and the Shinsengumi was like the military police of that. So all the characters that are Shinsengumi are like 60, 70, 80. They're like the old guard that protected like the old ways of Japan in that time. So yeah. So they're a different faction in this regard.
All right.
7th Division, you have the Shinsengumi, you have Sugimoto's group, but you also have another group that follows this sniper named Hijikata, who you'll meet eventually in the show. So there's like a lot of factions, including the prisoners themselves,
right?
That kind of stuff.
But it's the leader of the 2nd Division who is by far the most graphic.
Wild.
Apparently, during the war, he lost a frontal portion of his skull.
Yeah.
And when he gets excited or nervous or anything, so he wears sort of a he has these hollowed out underneath eyes.
If his eyes under him, yeah.
Right. In terms of the animation, if you haven't seen the show, if you have ever seen Attack on Titan, it kind of looks like the animation of the eyes of the Titans.
Like exposed muscle.
Right, exposed muscle under the eye, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And he wears sort of a very Phantom of the Opera type mask, and that's because he's missing the forward portion of his skull.
Yeah.
And so anytime he gets excited or scared or anything, brain goo drips out.
He's like, and he's so like blasé about it. He's like,
you know what it was to me?
I goo every now and then.
It was like Gary Oldman in The Fifth Element.
Yes, very much so.
When he just starts getting like weird secretions dripping down his forehead, and I'm like, what the hell is this?
And he's like, I must apologize because of the damage to my frontal lobe. Every now and then a secretion comes out of my forehead. Like that kind of stuff. So going further, he's not just polite, and that frontal lobe damage really made him.
Yeah, he's like, it really seems to affect my temper.
Yeah. And there's a guy who sticks his finger in his face, and bad move on that guy because
he bites his finger off and shoots him in the head.
Freaking just bites his finger off. Yeah, so he just bites the guy's fingers off and spits out and goes, sorry, I lose my temper now because of my frontal lobe damage. My bad. That kind of stuff.
So now we've got Sugimoto and Aspira, and they're chasing the skins, okay?
Yes.
Now we've got the 7th Division, who at some point, they capture Sugimoto, they try and torture him. They're looking for the skins, but they're sort of, this leader with the skull issue has decided to just sort of sit back and let Sugimoto chase down the skins himself because he's better at it. And why do the work when someone else can do the work for you, right?
And their goal is not to be rich, but to kind of start like a military nation with the 7th Division.
Yeah, they want to use the money so that they could take over Japan, starting with the port of Hokkaido or whatever.
Right. Because Hokkaido is separate from the rest of the mainland, so you can easily say, like, this is ours now, bye, like that kind of stuff. Right. So, and
then there's the hunter.
Yeah, he's a Matagi, and he also goes in with another guy.
Not Matagi, the man who makes bears disappear.
I'm trying to remember which one. Is that Hijikata? I think he's the guy. He's the guy who keeps saying the word boner when he does things.
Yes, he's about to shoot his gun and he's like, boner!
Right, I don't know why. Garrett, like normally I can explain things pretty well in the frame of Japanese culture, but I have no idea.
I don't think you actually have his name written down here.
Yeah, but he is he's a hunter who is one of the prisoners, and he wants to, so that's another thing that we have to talk about is that along with Sugimoto and Asirpa is constantly followed by this white wolf named Renpar, who is like Snow from.
No, well, I'm sorry. What's his name?
Renpar.
It's Retar.
Oh, sorry.
And my wife is watching this with me, and she goes, "Is that wolf's name?"
I guess, and watch it like ironically means like the most intelligent wolf that's ever lived.
I know, but the subtitles calls it Retar, and we're like, who named this wolf?
Oh my god, yeah, I mean that's really true about the wolf, and it's also kind of a fun, interesting ecological idea about how Japan, and especially with the inclusion of the United States coming in and out as they please, the hunting got extreme. The usage of land got extreme. They started using strychnine to kill all the wolves. So, like, there's a huge ecological message from the story as well because he's probably the last of his kind. He's like, Dragonheart, where he's like, I am
dire wolf for those who have watched, like, Game of Thrones.
Right.
Now, I have a question for you about the wolf. Also, this is the title of the first episode, but I didn't hear them use it. But at some point, the wolf protects Aspira and pins a guy to the ground, and he's about to like put the death blow on it and squish this guy's neck. And Aspira calls him off and says, "No." And I'm reading this off a note. Don't become a Wenkamoy.
A Wenkamoy, which means bad god. So the name of the show, Golden Kamuy, the word Kamuy is an Ainu word for god. And so, like, I guess the idea,
golden god.
Golden god, which means that all these people are worshiping gold. They're worshiping their greed. The show is Golden Kamuy. But Kamuy in the Ainu language is god, and Wenkamuy means, like, evil god. And so what that means is it's a bear or a wolf or some, because they consider all the creatures to be gods visiting Earth.
Right.
To give them meat, to give them pelts. It's the way they survived, right? And so Wen Kamui is an animal like a bear that has tasted humans and now needs to be killed because now that they got the idea of taste for humans.
Okay, so that's why she calls off her wolf and says, "Don't become a Wenkamoy," because she doesn't want the spirit of the wolf to go bad.
Right, exactly, because they go evil, and then apparently, according to their soul, that they go to hell, all that stuff.
And their punishment from there forward is they can only eat human flesh.
Right, exactly. But it's true that when bears eat humans, they become less fearful of them, and so they will look for humans because they know they can eat them. So it's a real...
I wonder if that means that the deer on my front yard every night have tasted human flesh because they're not scared of us at all.
I'm a Wen Kamui. Not sure. Yeah, just like staring at you with their antlers.
I love that. I always use this for antlers for deer when it's so clearly like Rocky and Bullwinkle. Sorry, Bullwinkle moose.
Which I think is great.
I've digressed. Wen Kamui, they're all gods. Got it.
Yes, but I think that kind of leads into like another thing that I like about the show is that it's like a fun survival show, and it does really give really good tips on like what to do in the wintertime if you're need water or if you need food and like the way they used to hunt indigenously and stuff like that. And I thought I got a lot.
There was one, and I don't know if you could do this with today's artillery, but when the escape artist, I'm going to call him that because I can't remember his name to pronounce it correctly. Yeah. And Sugimoto fall into the water, and they're trying to like kill each other, but immediately the biggest danger becomes hypothermia, and so they have to get warm. So they end up putting like an artillery shell into a piece of wood, and they hit it, and it sparks, and it starts a fire. And I was like, I do not know if that's legitimate, but it is certainly clever if it is.
Right, and or they would be like squirrels. If you want to catch squirrels, you put loops on a log, and they think they're lazy, so they want to take the easiest way down. And as they're going down, they get like strangled by these ropes. And like, it was interesting to hear like survival techniques that like the show pauses from the wildness of the treasure hunt to give you those really interesting like survival tidbits.
So I appreciated it because if need be, I would have no issue eating squirrel. However, I would not eat squirrel tartare, which essentially... What is it?
They called it Sita Top in the show because it's like the sound you make as you're jumping goes Sita Top, Sita Top, Sita.
Right, they're just going...
Yeah, they're just like making like meatballs essentially out of squirrel meat essentially.
Right, but she's like, oh, you can have it raw.
And the funny thing that I always loved about that always made me laugh is that, Sugimoto wants to always be nice and not like be mean whenever she's like offering him like the grossest thing, like have the squirrel brain. And so his face is always this like contorted mess of him going like when he's trying to eat it. Like you can tell he's just trying to be nice about it, but it's just really funny.
They do that with her too. They contort her face to look like an old woman.
Right. Like I posted it on our Instagram, like the many faces of a Sirpa, because that's another thing. Like they don't treat her as like the cutesy girl all the time. They treat her as like a normal girl who cries and has an ugly cry face.
Dude, she's badass. I mean, she's badass. His life left and right.
And that's why. And so this goes to an idea of like why I love a Sirpa is a Sirpa is a character that A isn't a character of her own culture. She B explains everything in a really good way to an adult. C, she's still allowed to be a kid, so it's not like I'm old for my age, and so therefore they can sexualize her in some godforsaken way. And also, like, she has a really good relationship with Sugimoto that you want to see grow. And she's also, as you said, she's a badass. She's a really good hunter. She's a very good fighter. And she also calls herself an Ainu for a new age. So Ainu women usually get tattoos over their face. They kind of like, in my mind, kind of like the Joker makeup, just like on their face. But it's there to show, like, how old you are and how important the...
well, it's when they're ready to be married off, they tattoo around your lips.
Right, and so she's like, I'm not going to do that. And like, I also understand my culture to be survival techniques, not really like strict religious text.
Now, so obviously when we meet her grandma, she's got like the tattoo out to here. Right. But did you sort of think of when they said, oh, when you're of age to get married, you tattoo around the lips? In your mind, did you think of lipstick?
Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah,
like when we try and make someone who's younger look older and sexualize them in the media, you put lipstick on them, and all of a sudden it's like
it makes them older. Yeah, I also think they also showed it as a sign of status, because as she mentioned in the show, that the bigger the makeup is, the more important the husband that you end up with is. So like he's a chieftain or like a warrior that's really highly regarded, the woman herself will have bigger lipstick face, so to speak. So
but let's remember, everyone, it is a tattoo.
yes, it is a tattoo.
It is
not going anywhere. It's also blue, so it's not even like a pretty shade of red. It's like, it looks like someone got like a really bad bruise to her lips. So
if the end of the world were to come, I would gladly take Aspira and Seiko Busujima.
Seiko as your partner, Asirpa as your guide, I'm hoping, right?
Yeah. I mean, at least for a couple of years.
And I think, what's wild is that this show and this manga that I'm reading is weirdly, like, it's laissez-faire about the violence. Like, no one is, like, phased. Like, when violence happens to him, like, no one blinks an eye. Like, there's people who get their ears cut off in this show, someone who gets their face lopped off. Like, no one's phased by it. No one's going like, my face is gone. They're just like, I'm still doing what I'm doing. So
well, so I wonder, because I've read a lot of like Westerns, and that's portrayed a lot that way, and I just can't help but think that life must have been so terrible that this would not phase you
in the least. If you ever watch like Million Ways to Die in the West, with
yes,
talks about like all the ways you could basically, why it sucks to be part of like the West, and like die farting, like that kind of stuff.
You have diarrhea all the time.
And like, what's his name? Mel Brooks brought that up in Blazing Saddles, where he, like, all the cowboys are just sitting around the fire, and he's just like ripping ass the whole time.
Yeah.
He's like, he said in a documentary, he's like, I just imagine cowboys drinking coffee and eating beans all day, that they would just be ripping ass the entire time they're there. And it's true. Like, it would actually really suck to be in these times, and this show is no different from that. So some things you're going to look forward to, Garrett, as you go forward, if you want to continue the show.
Right.
Also, if you were to read the manga, we have a serial killer that gets an erection every time he thinks about Sugimoto killing him.
Mm-hmm.
You get a guy who creates skin suits, much like Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. You have, it just gets wilder, more wild, and more like, hey, there's skins being thrown off people all the time, no big deal, and stuff like that. Or a gay yakuza. Like, it gets wild, but like, it's never boring. It's like 24, right? Always something happening, never boring. You're like, I don't know if I follow this, but it's never boring, that kind of stuff. So let's go to our idea of the two questions I always ask you is, would you keep watching knowing what you now know with the episodes that you've watched?
Hell yes.
Yeah. So what are some things that you like about it, that kind of stuff?
Oh my God, so much. So I know it's not like directly Western, but it certainly speaks to the frontier, like the wild frontier element. And it might not be the great American West, but it's the frontier of Japan in the same time period. It's not in high school.
Not in high school. I didn't even know high schools existed in 1905.
I'm sure they didn't. And this is a big bonus.
Bonus!
The music is terrific. The characters are interesting. There's super loud and fast moments, but there's also the quiet moments.
Mm-hmm.
There's interesting storytelling. The characters are not just like, look, I enjoyed High School of the Dead immensely. But at the same time, you can't ask to be taken seriously and then use breasts as a prop.
Right,
so,
exactly.
So this is just, I mean, it's, they put a lot of great ingredients in the bowl and just mixed it on up.
I figured you really like this one as well, knowing that you like the historical stuff, you like the Samurai Champloo, you like the slower stuff. So
Killer. And I kind of feel bad because I like it so much that, like, I love Samurai Champloo and I love Cowboy Bebop. But I really think at some point we might have to revisit them, even if we've seen all the episodes, just because the way that you're exposing me to a lot of these things is, yes, we're running across a lot of stuff I don't like.
Right.
But when I run across something I do like, I'm immediately thinking, oh, but I don't want to dismiss the things that I've liked before.
Right.
Like, especially with our 10-point scoring system. And I'm like, oh, but what did I give those? Because this is, so, but I was a big fan. Really big fan.
So what are some things you are hoping to learn from the show or take from the show? What are some mysteries you want? I know I already told you some of the characters, but...
Well, dude, we've barely scraped the surface. So I want to find out all of them, their quest for their quest for the tattoos.
Mhm.
Is it even real? I mean, obviously the tattoos are real, but to what extent is the actual gold real? Okay, I want to see revenge stories. There's this set of really cruel twins that try and kill Sugimoto. Sugimoto ends up killing one of them, but that other one is still alive. So I'd be shocked if we didn't see him come around. You know, I want to know more about Aspira and her people, and no doubt at some point, because life is cruel to indigenous people, I guarantee her village is going to get burned down and her grandma is going to get killed, or something tragic that's going to like spur her emotionally to move forward on the journey when she thought she couldn't before. So that will be interesting to see. I want to see old Skull Leakage get his comeuppance in a particularly cruel
Do you have
way.
skull leakage? Do you have... May include skull leakage. Urge to bite fingers. Symptoms of getting hit in the head with a grenade consist of stabbing people in the face with skewers.
So I mean, like, there's innumerable things that I'm interested in seeing where it goes, because a lot of times when we've watched something and I say, oh, we've barely scratched the surface, I don't know if I'm going to like it. I know I like this, but I think there's so many different ways you could go. And even if some of them are going to be classic storytelling that we've seen in other shows, or if it's going to be new, or if it's going to be cliche, I think they're going to do it right, and I think it's going to be interesting.
Right. I think for me, ultimately, like, I'm reading it right now, and I'm reading it still for this reason. Like, I like this so much that I don't want to watch the anime, because I feel the anime, like anything else, goes too fast.
Is the manga done?
I don't know. That is a great question. I will say, though, that that for me, it takes its, like, you know how we like the slow in the show? It looks like the manga is still running. It has 23 volumes. So right now, from what I've seen from my list, it's right now like 200 something chapters. So it's still going pretty strong. And I think they're about to get to season 3 of the anime. And I just worry that, much like other anime, that it's going to go so fast that it's going to tell me the story too quickly. And I'm enjoying reading it at my own pace. So that's the dilemma that I have, is that, like, the anime's good. It looks good. It's got, like, minus the CGI bears, it, like, has really good coloring and action, and it looks great. But I kind of want to go back to reading it like I have been. So for me, that's kind of the big conundrum that I'm facing at this point, because I really do enjoy it, as it's like the thing that I'm in right now. So what we're going to do, as we always do, is what's known as the Weeb and Noob score. As Garrett mentioned, it's a 10 rank score, and it doesn't signify if it's good or bad, but it signifies, like, out of everything that we're discussing today, which should be in the front of your line, which should be maybe towards the back. For Weeb, it basically means that, like, if it's a higher score, go out and watch it now, but also you can learn a lot from it, experience more of what anime has to offer from this thing. And if it's a little farther back, you can be like, it's a dime a dozen, you know, go back. Garrett, like, for a noob, it might be also Barry's entry. Is it hard to watch? Is a big thing that I always ask you. So for me, and I want so badly to save 10. I do. I want to save 10. So, like, I want to say 9.5, but know that, like, in a parentheses, it's like 9.99, 9.9999 repeating. Because while I don't think it's perfection, I love it because, Garrett, I got to be honest with you, man. I've watched a lot of anime over my time. I've read a lot of manga in my time. But at the end of the day, I still find these nuggets that I get excited to read. And it
took me a half an episode to know that this was special.
Right. It's a good show. And not only is it good, it's exciting. It hits so many different tones. It's serious but fun. It's got all the different notes. It's never boring. It's never too much. And it's even funny sometimes, which is weird considering the show is very violent. So with that being said, it's a 9.5, knowing that, like, it should be higher, and I'm really saving that 10 for, like, a real special something that, like, even like after it's done, like, I think a 10 to me means, like, I'd stand up and cry in my living room and my hands. Like, that's what I think makes a 10. This gets close to that because I really like it.
All right.
But Garrett, for your noob review, what would you give for your noob score?
9.75.
Yeah.
And I don't normally score them like that. This show is a 10, and it loses a quarter point for the bear.
It gets a CGI bear subtraction, which is wild because, like, you know, for what would I think is, like, a really, really good show, and in my mind is, like, really perfect, the bears is very distracting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Also, Retar, the wolf is kind of crappily animated. But I mean,
yeah, anything that's like an animal, just they don't do a really good job of it. And
for this show though, like barriers to entry. I mean, if you have trouble watching things that are amazing, then that's a barrier to entry because it was so good.
But there's another thing, and this is where I think is interesting. Like you and I are men in our mid-30s. We like our anime, and anything that we watch have a little bit of depth to it. But there's people who like anime because it's surface level. They like the Matoi body pillows. They like the High Schools of the Dead because they're not too serious. And maybe this might not be for you. You might even think that this is like a 6 or 7 for you because it's too serious and too informative, too historical. So I get that. But for where we are in our position and what we've been like watching this whole time, this show really knocks it out of the park to me. And I know Garrett just said so too. So, for me, Garrett, it's really exciting when I get to see something that I'm thoroughly enjoying and going to continue watching because we watch shows for the sake of this podcast, but this is what I'm doing right now for like my own enjoyment.
Right.
Joining me on it. And so, as always, it's really just as important to hear your thoughts. Is Golden Kamuy the type of show that has like sparked your interest and reignited your weebness, or is it something that you really think is new, exciting, unique? Or is it something that's, as I said, too historical, too up its own butt to really give it its fair shot? Let us know in the comments below because I fully expect this is going to have very stark and strong opinions for most people. But before we leave, I want to make sure that you all know to follow us on Twitter at Weeb_Noob. And also you can join us on Instagram at Wanwa Podcast, WANWA Podcast. And also make sure you like, subscribe, and write a review for us, and maybe give us a 5-star. We greatly appreciate it. So, Garrett, as we end this show, do you have any final thoughts that we have about Golden Kamuy?
Don't walk. Run. Run to your TV. Run to your computer. Run to your phone. Download Crunchyroll. There's your plug, Crunchyroll, even though you have a terrible user interface.
Sponsor us.
And watch Golden Kamuy. And if you don't like it, good on you. Right. But I would color me shocked if any of you out there don't find this show entertaining.
Right. And when we mean run, we mean imagine a CGI bear puppeteering itself towards you at full speed. Get yourself some squirrel brain. Run up to a snow-covered tree and escape from the wilderness only to enjoy this great anime. We'll be doing that as well and wishing you a great see you next week.
Take care, y'all.
You don't need a skin-tattooed map to find our subscribe button. Hit it today.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we scraped perfection with 2 scores that were almost 10s. But what do you think is that good? Be sure to let us know in the comments below.